All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Slater Museum of Natural Histories at University of Puget Sound's virtual night at the museum, where we'll be talking all about some undertold and untold stories from the life sciences. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that here on the University of Puget Sound, and throughout the Tacoma area, we are on the lands of the Puyallup and the Coast Salish peoples who've cared for this land since time immemorial, and without whose conservatorship, we would not have the land we have today. I would invite everybody, if you're able, to go to native-land.ca, and if you are in Tacoma area or elsewhere, figure out the land that you are on and take a moment to think about the people who've cared for that land in the past. I'm so excited and thrilled to be hosting our second virtual night at the museum. We're going to have some wonderful speakers tonight. First, we're going to have Nick Wolfge, who's going to be talking about women in paleontology and Mary Anning and some stories from the Lyme Regis in England. Then we're going to have Beatrice Bugos sharing about some Indigenous knowledge in the sciences. Olivia Frost is going to be talking to us about the history of ornithology in the Audubon Society. And then Rahul Kothari and I will be finishing the evening talking about some really cool examples of community-based conservation. So just some basic ground rules for the evening. I'm going to ask everyone to please remain muted. There will be time for questions where you'll be able to pipe in at the end of everybody's session. And after those, after each speaker, we're going to have a 5-minute break between speakers where you'll be able to get up and stretch your legs as we get our speakers into the streaming station so they can go ahead and do their presentations. So we'll start out the evening with Nick Wolfge, who is in our streaming station right now. And Nick is going to be talking about Mary Anning and also doing a short interview with Kana Fox-Dobbs, who's one of the professors here at the University of Puget Sound, who we're very honored and lucky to have joining us this evening. All right, I'll let you take it away, Nick.
All right, thank you, Dylan. Yeah, so today I'm going to be starting off the evening with a short talk about women in paleontology. So first off, I'm going to start off in the more sciencey corner of things. Can anyone tell me what an ammonite is? Has anyone ever heard of an ammonite before? You just, oh, Mateo.
Yeah. I know that they're often fossils, and I think they kind of look like shells.
Yeah, they are definitely not alive anymore. They went extinct about 66 million years ago. They are, I believe, from the cephalopod class, so they're related to like the nautiloids that we see today. If anyone's ever seen a nautilus before with the spiral shell, I've got sorry, I guess I was muted. How much of that did you catch? All of that? Okay. Yeah, so I've got some specimen here. I think we have a ammonoid shell here, which I can show you in the specimen cam. That's an ammonoid fossil, I believe. And ammonoids are important because they are indicator fossils. We use them to help date other rocks or other fossils around them. And an indicator fossil has to have these particular qualities. They have to be widespread. They have to have existed in like a discrete span of time, and they also have to have sort of an evolutionary span where they look different at different times, so we can tell like when exactly when in that time span that creature existed. And so they're really good for helping dating to help date other fossils. One person who was really who worked a lot with ammonites was Mary Anning. She was she lived in the Victorian period in this little coastal town called Lyme Regis with all of these these cliffs that had fossils in them, and it's now actually called the Jurassic Coast, and you can still visit there and look for fossils. So if you ever go to Britain, you can go there and maybe find some fossils. And Mary Anning was really interesting. She was really a pioneer in the field of paleontology, because women back then really didn't participate in science like maybe they do now. Mary Anning was also quite poor, so she didn't have the formal education that other people had, and other paleontologists at the time had. Her father was a carpenter, and they basically made money with carpentry and by selling fossils like these ammonites here for money as curiosities at basically like a little gift shop that they sold to visitors. Anning actually sold an ammonite fossil to a gentlewoman when she was just a girl, and she was fossil hunting at quite a young age, and she really developed some really formidable skills as a paleontologist through her life that way. She became an amazing sketcher at with anatomical features. So she found fossils like this. This is a plesiosaur skeleton, and she made these incredibly detailed notes that you might expect from someone with a formal education to make, but she taught herself how to do that, and she taught herself how to hunt for fossils. So she was really quite talented, and she was also quite prolific as well. She found one of the first ichthyosaurs to be found in Britain, not the first ever, but to correctly identify the first ichthyosaur in Britain, and also the first pterosaur in Britain, which is, I believe, are now called pterodactyls. But then they were called known as pterosaurs, and an ichthyosaur is just like a cross between a dolphin and an alligator. They look kind of like a lizard fish. That's kind of what the name implies, although they are not lizard fish. They're entirely different thing, kind of animal. So and one of the most important discoveries that Anning made was this sketch that I'm showing you. Here's a more detailed one. She found a plesiosaur off the coast, on the coast, and this was the first plesiosaur to ever be discovered. Period. It was quite an amazing discovery, and it looked nothing like anyone had ever seen before. Up until this point, British people, scientists who were paleontologists, really only didn't have a good idea of how time had progressed. There's sort of this there's this prevalent dogma that existed, that basically God had created the earth as it is. The Victorian people were quite opposite of secular. So they basically believe that the earth hadn't changed, because if it did change, that would imply that God's creation was not perfect. And yet there are these examples that Mary Anning found and other paleontologists found that suggested that life had existed before us and before the creatures that we know today, and that the world had been very different millions of years ago. And it really flew in the face of this dogma that existed then, and helped challenge that dogma and pave the way for a modern theory of deep time, that the earth had changed and had harbored different life forms over a very long span of time. So that was incredibly important. It was also incredibly important for the theory of evolution. Charles Darwin had not yet formulated that theory yet, and Anning's discoveries were part of what, on top of other discoveries, are what helped build the support for that theory to take us into the modern life sciences. And so that was the contributions which she made were incredibly important. Here is the plesiosaur that she that she found. That this is the actual fossil that is, I forget where it is, but this is taken from the museum where it's now kept. Unfortunately, Anning was not recognized for these discoveries. Oftentimes, a British gentleman would purchase the fossil off of her, or just plain take credit for her discovery, and not give her any credit in the papers that they published at all. And also the British Geological Society flatly refused to admit her because she was a woman, of course, and lower class, and also a dissenter of the English Church. So she was, she was not likely to be admitted into that society of people who were upper class and men, and part of the Anglican Church, which she wasn't. So that made it very difficult for her, but nonetheless, she persevered and became, honestly, a bit of a big name in paleontology. From America to Europe, the different paleontology societies asked her to consult with them, to help them hunt for fossils. She had renowned expertise at this. She was very good at what she did, and people, despite not crediting her, still realized that and still sought out her help. So even though she wasn't formally recognized, after her death, she did begin to receive that recognition. So shortly after her death, Charles Dickens, who is quite famous, as we know, wrote a memorial for her in his weekly magazine, which is a pretty big honor. Then later, much later, in I believe 2010, the Royal Society of England named her one of the 10 most, or Royal Academy of Sciences, excuse me, named Anning one of the top 10 most influential women in science, which is a huge deal. And Anning herself was buried in her hometown, overlooking the cliffs that she loved to explore so much, with a stained glass mural dedicated to her by the British Geological Society. So even though in life her legacy was never acknowledged, now we have a lot to thank her for, and a lot of her legacy is what has brought us to, has modernized our view of the world, and accelerated our understanding of deep time and evolution. And so to talk a little more about that legacy, our own Professor Kana Fox-Dobbs from the University of Puget Sound Geology Department has graciously come in to answer some questions. So Professor Fox-Dobbs, if you would like to unmute yourself. Hello.
Hi, thank you.
We're going to ask a few questions about your own experiences in the sciences and about Mary Anning. So how did you personally get into the geology, the sciences? Did you pursue other things before that?
Well, I was thinking about this a little bit beforehand, and so I grew up on a farm in a rural area of the Northwest, and we were so far down the road and over the hill that we did not get TV reception, and there was no cables that headed out that direction. So I really spent my childhood outdoors, and as long as I can remember, I've been curious about the natural world. So I do think my interest and how I got into science probably tracks back to just spending a lot of time outdoors, and also just, I think, an inherent curiosity. I have been fortunate to have opportunities, which I think are part of the story. There's a natural curiosity, but then there's also opportunities. I was a pretty keen kid in terms of my interest in science, and and studying, I guess. And so I saw, there were opportunities and I sought them out. So I had the chance to work in a biology research lab at a local college when I was in high school. And so I kind of got a taste for what lab work was like and lab research. And I thought that it was fun to ask questions and test them. And I really enjoyed the sort of the cooking that went on in the lab with trying different flavors of things and seeing what worked. And then I had some additional research opportunities because of that introduced me to the idea of field work. And then I was totally hooked. I mean, I liked lab work, but field work seemed like the ideal combination of both personal and professional fun. And I knew at that point, so by the end of high school, that I was interested in going into a field of science when I went to college. And the summer after high school, kind of on a whim, I actually took an intro geology class as a summer class at that same local college. And I hadn't had any earth science experience before that, other than spending a lot of time outdoors. And I remember loving the idea that you could see that there were skills that would help you see the landscape through the lens of earth science. And I got a few of those skills through that course. And then I basically went straight into a geology program then in college because of that course.
Yeah, so it was just kind of blind chance that you ended up a little bit in geology, but that's really cool. And you were kind of kind of forced outside, and that gave you a love of the outdoors too. Yeah, very interesting. What inspired you to get into this? Like, was there like a mentor or a teacher, like in the community college that you went to, maybe?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. And so I was pretty lucky growing up. I had I had several aunts, and aunts in quotes because they weren't related aunts, but women who were mentors and figures in my life that were professional scientists. And I remember being very inspired by their careers. They just truly seemed to blur the lines between work and play, which is not the role model of sort of adult or parental work that I think I had seen in other professions. And then I was lucky to cross paths when I went to college. So I had some interests and some experiences when I was younger. And then when I went to college, I had my undergraduate thesis research advisor 100% was the next level inspiration for me. And he's, the reason that I probably ended up in academics coming out of college. I think I came in with some motivation, and he boosted that. And when I mentor students now, I try and think back to all of the positive things that he did for me, or the ways that he was a good mentor for me, and recreate those even in the tough moments, or the tough, frustrating moments of working with other people.
On the topic of role models like your aunts, had you ever heard of Mary Anning in your field before, or when you were like in an undergraduate with geology?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I teach intro to geology, sort of intro to physical geology, Geo 101 type courses, and then I also teach an upper level paleontology course. And in the textbooks for both of those courses, which are quite different courses and different audiences, there's always sort of like a history of geology or history of paleontology short chapter or bit. And many of those, even if it's just the general geology, will mention and credit Mary Anning as an early fossil hunter. And so I'm positive I read about her in my textbooks when I was an undergrad, but I think it always felt probably kind of like it was written, which is that it's sort of a nod to the fact that there's this female historic figure in our discipline, but then no acknowledgement maybe of her true role and the professional mistreatment that she underwent. So it's sort of a bit of the token mention. So I think, yes, I think she's probably someone that I've known about for a long time, and I certainly include in my introduction to the history of the science. But I think it seems like the true stories are now, it's going to be easier to tell those stories because there's a lot more resources available now besides just the textbook mention.
Yeah, like get a little more in depth about her history for other young scientists. On the topic of young scientists, do you have any advice for them, like how they can get into the sciences like you did?
Yeah, well, I think it's, you always refer back to your lived experience. And my lived experience was certainly one of taking advantage of opportunities or seeking out opportunities when they existed. And it never hurts to ask. So if you're interested in something and it's not clear that there's a door that opens to get you in there, you can always ask if there's a door. And in terms of geology, it's a tough discipline. We talk about this a lot at the undergraduate level, because unless someone has had a high school earth science course, maybe a middle school earth science course, which could include everything from, the classic like rocket launch project to maybe describing a few rocks. Most students who come in at the college level don't know what geology is, and so that first class is really our opportunity to hook students. So I would say if you're interested in the landscapes around you, if you're sort of generally interested in natural history, the environment, issues related to the environment, understanding that landscape through the lens of earth science is really fun and powerful. And try it. Take an earth science course or take a geology course if you're interested in life in the past. So a lot of students, sort of focus on ecology because it's introduced early in our curriculum as K-12 students, and it's pretty approachable for a lot of us. But think about paleoecology. So all of that same cool, interesting stuff in the life sciences, you can ask those same questions in the past and study paleontology.
Speaking of those open doors that you mentioned, what do you think the state of diversity is in your own field or in the sciences in general? Like, are those doors open? Do you think there's accomplishments to be made, or have accomplishments been made, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And there are, I would say that the informal doors, those are different doors than formal doors of opportunity where people are invited more explicitly through. And in the earth sciences, I would say we really struggle on many facets of diversity. It's a physical science, which kind of crosses the boundary into natural science, but is a physical science, which in general, our numbers are not great. Geology has done, or earth science has done, I think, a decent job because it is so interdisciplinary. So it has the chance to learn from sort of success stories in other disciplines that have been more progressive on some of these fronts, I think, for longer, to engage and create maybe formal programs. So I would say in general, earth sciences has made good progress in probably the past 2 decades on creating formal doors of opportunity. So I feel good about that. I mean, our professional societies, I think, are working hard on these very real issues, and there's very real conversation. I would not say that the demographics are yet shifting in a way that make it feel like a real success story. I mean, at the undergraduate level, University of Puget Sound is a great example. Over half of our majors, sometimes significantly over half of our majors, are female students. But then where do they go? You don't see them then at the faculty or principal investigator or lead scientist. It doesn't even have to be academics, right? These sort of leadership roles within our discipline. And so I think it's, the inverted triangle definitely exists in the earth sciences. And that, I think, is where a lot of the effort needs to be focused, is working on retention and maintaining diversity of all types throughout the many levels of both professional and academic structure.
Got it. That's a very good insight. Thank you, Professor. Unless you have anything else to say, that is the end of my time. Thank you again, Professor Foxtops, for coming and talking with us today.
Of course. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me. Yeah, try an earth science course. Take a job. You might like it.
It sounds fun, yeah.
As a former geology major, I second that for sure.
I'll turn it over to you, Dylan. Should I go to one of the
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and give those headphones a disinfect for me, and we'll go ahead and bring Beatrice in, who's going to be our next speaker. And we're going to go ahead and our audience, if you'd like to take a quick 3-minute break to do that while we get our next speaker set up, go ahead and do that, and we will go ahead and meet back here with our next speaker at 6:36. So Beatrice, you can go ahead and join us in a second. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Fox-Knobs. Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you again. All right. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're about to start with our next speaker. It's Beatrice Bugos, who's going to be teaching us a little bit of something about Indigenous knowledge in the sciences. Ooh, Beatrice, you're still muted and your video is off.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And you can see my presentation. Okay. Hi, I'm Beatrice Bugos. I'm a sophomore here at University of Puget Sound. I am a biology and EPDM major, and I've been a docent for a year and a half, but most of that has been online. Still fun, which is different. Today I'm going to be presenting on Indigenous wisdom in science. And before I begin, I just want to preface that I am a white person who is interpreting Indigenous wisdom through my own lens. And of course, I'm going to try to do the best that I can, but I am open to feedback at the end or other comments that people have as well. And I'm also going to be going over a lot of big topics such as decolonization, eugenics, and of course, Indigenous wisdom. These topics have a lot of different concepts. They would take, I could do a whole presentation on each one of them, but of course we don't have that time today. So I'm just going to be pulling the most topical information about those topics for this presentation. All right, so an overview of my presentation. My subject is Robin Wall Kimmerer. I'm going to be talking about some Indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge through her lens, and then moving on to decolonizing of museums, and then ending with the Slater Museum. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is a plant ecologist who is an enrolled citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. She's focuses on the restoration of both the ecological communities and people's relations to nature. She has founded and directed the Center of Native Peoples and the Environment, where they have programs that draw on Indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge for the goal of sustainability. She's also an author who's written the books Breeding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. And she's also written Gathering Moss, a natural and cultural history of mosses. If you're a UPS student, you probably read excerpts from one of these two books in a bio class, and I'm sure in other departments as well. Moving on to some of her examples of Indigenous wisdom. Of course, there's a lot of Indigenous peoples who all have different ideas on Indigenous wisdom. So this is not at all, this is just one example of what Indigenous wisdom can look like. And the first aspect that I want to share with you, for example, is asters and goldenrods, as you can see on the left. Asters are the purple ones and the goldenrods are the yellow. And I'm also going to show you some specimens that we have. As you can see, the smaller one on closer on the left, I guess, is an aster, or they're both asters. The one farther, more on the right, is also an aster, and this is a leafy aster that was found on Mount Rainier. I was quickly looking through the herbarium, so I did not find a goldenrod, but these are just two examples of what an aster can look like. Okay. This should still be the presentation. Going back to this, the reason why I'm showing you the asters and goldenrods is because when Kimmerer went to botany school. She wanted to answer the question, why asters and goldenrods look so beautiful together. And the first answer that she got from a professor was, quote, that question was not science, that if she was interested in beauty, she should go to art school. That science, as a way of knowing, explicitly sets aside our emotions, our aesthetic reactions to things. We have to analyze them as if they were just pure material and not matter and spirit together. Kimura was not content with this answer. She wanted to answer on her own terms, and she came up with the explanation of that it was a matter of aesthetics and it's a matter of ecology. And the reason for this is because asters and goldenrods are on opposite sides of the color wheel. The purple and the yellow are on opposite sides of the color wheel, and this attracts more pollinators, which in turn helps the flowers. And the second piece of Indigenous wisdom that I want to share as an example is the idea of gratitude. In a presentation titled Questions for a Resilient Future, that was done in 2014 for Animals and Nature.org, she gives some explanation to this, so I will let her explain that.
Gratitude for all that we have been given. Now, gratitude may seem like weak tea, given the desperate challenges that lie before us, but it is powerful medicine, more than a simple thank you. Gratitude pulls us into relationship with other entities, reminding us that our very existence relies on the gifts of others. Gratitude calls us to acknowledge the personhood of all beings, from maple trees to snapping turtles. And gratitude is humbling. It's an antidote to the arrogance of our time. It reminds us that we are just one member of the democracy of species. It reminds us that the earth does not belong to us. Indigenous story traditions are full of cautionary tales about the failure of gratitude. When people forget to honor the gift, the consequences are always material as well as spiritual. The spring dries up, the corn doesn't grow, the animals do not return to those who have neglected gratitude. But the Western storytelling tradition is strangely silent on this matter. And so we find ourselves in an era where we are rightly afraid of the climate that we have created. The next step in our cultural evolution.
All right. So this explanation of gratitude, what I understood from it was that we are all individuals on this earth, and we are part of a whole system and relations to each other of both objects and other beings on this earth, and that there is a constant gift giving of objects and beings to one another. Okay, now I'm going to move on to decolonizing of museums. This work is starting to be done as museums start to work with the tribal nations to represent the Indigenous peoples more accurately. And one example of this is the Maori people and the Te Papa Museum in New Zealand. The Te Papa Museum is the merging of the National Museum and the National Art Gallery, so it's a pretty prominent museum in New Zealand. And the Maori people wanted to, they want to determine the space and the content and the practices that happen in their exhibits in this museum. So they, in terms of decolonizing, they came up with these ideas of morphication. And these are the goals written out here. And what I understood from this is that the Maori people wanted to include more of their own views into the exhibit. They wanted to humanize their relationship to their objects, and they also wanted to respect that there are multiple worldviews that can inform their stories and objects and the way that they are viewed. So most of the decolonization that is happening in museums is more with anthropological exhibits. And with Slater, or with natural history museums in general, there tend to be anthropological exhibits included with the natural history, but Slater does not have that. However, there are still some ways that Slater can start this decolonizing process. And one of those ways is through land acknowledgements. And I recommend that we put together a land acknowledgement similar to the one that SARPI has put together for the university's use, or we can also just adopt theirs. And a land acknowledgement is like one that Dylan had said in the beginning of this presentation. It helps recognize the events that have happened on the land that we are currently on, so that we can help address those issues that have arisen from that, and help to, or start that process of decolonization. Another aspect I'm going to talk about with the Slater Museum is James R. Slater himself. He was a biology professor at UPS, which was at that point the College of Puget Sound. He retired in 1950. He started Slater Museum, which is why it is named after him. And he also taught eugenics for a very long time here. And he taught it up until he retired in the 1950s, which was, he was one of the last college professors to teach eugenics, as that was starting to be phased out of biology curriculum. And eugenics is the practice or advocacy of improving the human species by selectively mating people with specific desirable hereditary traits. Eugenics is very problematic. It's very much rooted in white supremacy, ableism, anti-queer, just most marginalized peoples were seen as not having, quote, desirable characteristics, which led to a lot of issues. And one of those was mass sterilization of a lot of Indigenous women. And there's a lot more to eugenics, but that is just, I guess, one aspect of it. And the conversation of Slater and his practices of eugenics was started by Grace Eberhardt, who is a student here, and she was working on a project in Dr. Dexter Gordon's class, which then turned into a full-on research project that recognizes the legacy of Slater and eugenics. And out of this research project, there has become a lot of different aspects and conversations about eugenics. There is now a seminar class that is taught by Kristen Johnson on this topic. There is a symposium created by students and staff here at UPS that will be inviting speakers from across the US, as well as some here, to talk about eugenics in colleges. And this will be happening next fall, I believe. And there will be a exhibit outside of the Slater Museum currently about Slater's history. And then the last thing is that UPS is currently creating or has a committee to create principles on renaming buildings, which I think will be done at the end of this semester, and they'll start applying it to buildings next year. And it's likely that Slater will be the first test subject, although nothing has been decided on that yet. So in conclusion, just to wrap up, decolonization of the sciences comes with recognizing Indigenous wisdom as a valuable knowledge system. And since the practice of decolonization is fairly new, there's still so much for us to learn. So now I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. That was fantastic. So we'll open the floor. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to unmute and grill Beatrice about the topic she covered. But we'll open up the floor now.
How did you get interested in this topic, Beatrice?
Great question, Olivia. I think I was first. Oh, I just realized the lights turned off in here, but I think you can still see me.
If you wave your arms around, it happens to me all the time. It'll trigger the motion. You might have to back up a little bit. There we go.
I got interested in this topic because I'm currently reading Breeding Sweetgrass. I've also read just a lot of. I haven't finished it yet, but I've read a lot of excerpts of Kimmerer's work in different classes, so that kind of sparked the interest for me. And I'm just interested in Indigenous wisdom and how that can apply to the sciences, because I think it's super valuable, and definitely in the Western way of thinking, we don't connect with the earth as much as I think we could. So yeah, I find it to be an interesting topic.
Was there any piece of Indigenous knowledge that you, or like wisdom that kind of you took to heart that you kind of either surprised you or something that you really wanted to share with other people?
I think her topic of gratitude and gift giving, she goes into that a lot more in Breeding Sweetgrass. I've thought about that a lot since like being introduced to that idea of like how we can give back to the earth and how the earth is giving gifts to us. So we shouldn't just be like taking all the time, that it's like a shared I guess relationship. I think that's just really interesting to me. And I've definitely, like, when I go out in nature, I'm always like, oh, like, I wonder what the gift is going to be today. So I think about it a lot more than I think it's just a cool idea.
I like that. I think that thinking about gratitude and reciprocity is something we can take, not just in our relationship with nature, but our relationship with other people too, is how can we make sure we're not just taking from people, but also giving back and being reciprocal in our relationships.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
So my short question is the Slater Museum currently displaying goldenrod and aster together? And are there other types of species you could be displaying together to show complementarity? But that's part of a longer question, which is I was really struck by how you drew the distinction between looking at competition or differences between species as being sort of a Western idea, and looking at complementarity or the relationship between species and making sure that they all grow together as being more of an Indigenous way of looking at things. So, I mean, how would you do a display or do research to further explore this difference between competition and complementarity?
To answer your first question, asters and goldenrods are currently not on display. We typically don't have that many things on display here, as we are like a research museum. So these sheets that I showed were in the herbarium that I was like looking through. But in terms of competition and complementary, I mean, that's just kind of more of an ecology idea, or how I've been taught it. Maybe there is some Indigenous wisdom or knowledge with that. I'm not familiar with it. So I don't want to discount that as an explanation. But yeah, it's a common way of looking at relationships between different organisms as competition or facilitation. As are the organisms working together, or are they working against each other?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Beatrice. We are going to take another short, quick break while Olivia Frost gets ready to present her presentation about ornithology. But let's everyone give Beatrice a fantastic, huge hand. Thank you so much for sharing this. Yeah, excellent job. All right, I'm going to call Olivia in, and we'll go ahead and get that next presentation set up. All right, so our next presenter is going to be Olivia Frost, who's going to be talking to us about ornithology and the Audubon Society. Take it away, Olivia.
All right. You guys can hear me? Cool. And can you also see my slides?
You got to switch to the presentation scene, the presentation slide scene on OBS.
All right. Is that good?
Thumbs up.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, hello and welcome to our virtual Night at the Museum event. My name is Olivia Frost, and I'm a sophomore biology major. I've been a docent here for 2 years now, mostly online, like Beatrice said. So you might have come to one of my in-person table topics at past nights at the museum. For this virtual table topic, I'll be talking about the history of ornithology and specifically how the profession is recently acknowledging and dismantling the systems of oppression and inequality that it was founded on. Big topics, I know. I'm going to try to give you a 10-minute slam with some of the most important information that I found in my research. Also, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm presenting this topic through my personal perspective of being a white cisgendered woman, and I've done my best to appreciate and convey the work of others who have led different lives than my own. All right, so now is the time for some audience interaction. Do you guys know what ornithology means? I haven't really told you yet in the presentation, but you might be able to guess if you know, Greek or Latin, or based on the picture I have with my slide. So if anyone would like to unmute or put in the chat, I have that open as well. Just, wild guesses. Birds, yeah. Those aren't dinosaurs in the picture. So here we go. Ornitho is a Greek root meaning bird, and ology, Greek root meaning study of. So together it's the study of birds. In this presentation, I'll also be referencing adjacent fields and communities such as bird watching, citizen science relating to birds, and birding organizations, but they're all kind of encompassed in ornithology. And keeping with the theme of tonight, my untold story that I'll be highlighting this evening is that of Dr. Drew Lanham. Dr. Lanham is a Black American ornithologist and a professor of wildlife ecology at Clemson University. Dr. Lanham is a native of Edgefield, South Carolina, and as a boy, he grew up desperately wanting to fly, but after many failed attempts of jumping off his back porch with cardboard wings and a broken collarbone later, he settled with living vicariously through birds instead. I would now like to play you all a short video clip published by BirdNote to give you all an idea of who Dr. Lanham is as a living, breathing person, since I personally value some visual texts in this era of PowerPoints and Zoom calls.
Color shouldn't define you being able to be in the environment or not. Like, nature is so amazing that no matter the color of your skin or what you look like, you should just be able to enjoy the environment. That's how I feel.
I love birds, and I've never actually gotten to go on a birding trip with other people who like to go birding. I'm really excited. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. It was just another one of those butter butts. But they're so cute. It's a bird, a yellow rumped warbler.
At first, I wasn't really the bird type person, but they're growing on me. Each bird species has something different about them. kind of like us.
I totally learned that today. It's a little thumbprint yellow on the butt. That's a weird marking.
Birds can connect us to people, and the birds can connect us to issues, really. I mean, you look at a bird and you think about flight. You think about flight, you think about freedom. Everybody wants to be free. If I can watch birds, I'm free.
All right. Presentation. Okay. Throughout Dr. Lanham's professional career and personal relationship with birds and the communities surrounding them, he has worked to radically shift ornithology as a profession and passion by writing articles and books, appearing on podcasts, YouTube specials, and short films, and by using his own social media presence to spark conversations and implore change at a personal level. All right. So before I talk about how ornithology is changing today, it's probably a good idea to give you all some background on the foundation of ornithology as a profession. So another time for audience participation, what time period do you all think ornithology as a profession was founded? Just give a year or, you know, last week or something like that. Doesn't have to be accurate, obviously, just a way to get you all to participate.
1800s.
Dang, it's almost like you've seen this presentation before. Yes, late 1800s is correct. The foundation of ornithology at this time is mostly credited to the boom of public interest in natural history through the collection of natural artifacts, such as eggs and skins of birds. In the 1800s in the US, mostly middle-class Americans adopted collecting natural specimens and artifacts as a pastime to escape from an increasingly industrial world. In response to this novel hobby, and with the help of advancements in the dissemination of written information, many field identification guides for birds were also printed and distributed, which only augmented the interest of the public. All right. Oh, look at that. Okay, so natural history museums like Slater now house these surviving specimens from that time that played a huge role in sparking the interest in naming and cataloging of bird species and other types of animals, but in a way that seems sort of destructive to natural populations today. So I have a few of these specimens here with me to break up my lecture. So here we have some egg specimens, and I'm going to take out the little info card. These are actually chestnut-backed chickadee egg specimens. There we go. You can see some of them are broken, but most of them are whole specimens. They're preserved by taking out the yolk and albumin inside of the egg and just leaving the shell. So how old do you guys think these egg specimens are? I'm going to go back to the chat. I took out the cards so you guys can't cheat. All right, Dylan says 20 years old. Yeah, at least 20. 60 years, getting closer. These guys were actually collected in 1898, so before the turn of the 1900s. So yeah, oh, gotta get that back. All right, so eggs were one type of the specimens that were collected back then. And here we have another type of specimen. This is a skin. This is a northern flicker. And as you can see, it's a little bit harder to see on camera, but this flicker is actually missing one of its wings. So in these research specimens, it's very common to have these skins mounted on sticks with cotton in the middle. And then one of their wings is taken out to be put in a spread wing collection and fanned out like this wing right here. So this is a turkey wing, and it's all spread out in this kind of flapping position, I guess. So it's a lot easier for researchers to look at the lengths of feathers, colors of feathers, instead of having them all bound up on the side of the body like here. Oop. All right. We also have taxidermy mounts, which is more of a decorative way of preserving specimens. So here's an example of one of those. These were favored by people who wanted to preserve specimens in a sort of lifelike quality. All right. Going back to the slides. All right. This milestone in the 1800s for the foundation of ornithology also coincides with the influential life of John James Audubon. Audubon is considered one of the first ornithologists and is the artist and natural historian behind the Birds of America. I'm sure these images look somewhat familiar as they are very popular in ornithology. They're just beautiful prints of bird species that take into account variation between the sexes and also ages. At Slater, we actually have several taxidermy displays imitating the poses of birds seen in these paintings as well. The Birds of America is renowned as one of the most valuable natural history books ever published and is responsible for carrying Audubon's world-renowned legacy for generations. However, Audubon's life and legacy are often glorified by burying the ways he contributed to systemic inequality based on race and gender in the ornithological discipline and also in his personal life. Audubon was a slaveholder, which is a point that many people don't know, or if they do, they tend to ignore or excuse. He also perpetuated white supremacist views and was outspoken on his hateful beliefs. Following Audubon's death in 1851, there was a shift in ornithology's natural history focus to one centered more on analyses and conservation in the 20th century. And this is in response to growing concern in the collector community about the long-term stability of populations, since they were taking lots of specimens, both of eggs and adults. And also a growing renown and exclusivity surrounding the ornithological organizations interested in the scientific aspect of bird populations. One of these organizations is called the American Ornithologists Union, which is now the American Ornithologists Society. All right, now that I've hit a few main points in the history of ornithology as a profession, it's time to get back to Dr. Lanham's work in more recent history. So the history of systemic racism and sexism in science, and specifically ornithology, are issues that we face here in 2021. If you can remember an explicit incident in Central Park that happened last May, Christian Cooper was out birding in Central Park in the midst of peak migration season when he saw a white woman disregard the park's dog policy by allowing her pet to roam off leash. He pulled out dog treats in order to leash the dog himself. And the woman, who we now know as Amy Cooper, rushed toward him and warned that she would call the police. Christian calmly began filming the incident, and Amy Cooper insinuated that he would face grave consequences if she were to call the police because she is white and he is Black. Dr. Lanham responded to this incident in an article he wrote for Newsweek and stated that, quote, "I don't want birding while Black to be an oddity. I want Black lives to matter to the point where whatever we legally do, jogging, watching birds, sleeping in our beds, breathing, or otherwise just being human, we don't be blown apart by someone using the privilege of impunity against us because of the color of our skin. Bird on, y'all." Remembering back to our brief history lesson about the American Ornithologists Society, people of color and women were actively excluded from such organizations in the 1900s in order to further the academic agenda of the prominent white male leaders of the organizations. Dr. Lanham has used his experience with racism and the ornithological profession, profession and in birding to raise awareness around the systemic inequality that they were built on. As of 2019, almost 93% of birders in the US are white, according to a Department of Fish and Wildlife survey. And this is not because white people appreciate birds in natural areas more. Dr. Lanham's main goal is to increase access to natural spaces and communities in order to change the historical prevalence of Black people involved in these groups. I would now like to show you all a short video clip that Dr. Lanham put together in 2015 titled Rules for the Black Bird Watcher, which is his riff on the stigmatized experience of the American birder.
You know, they're essential tools for birding. They're your binoculars, your spotting scope, your field guide. And if you're Black, you're going to need probably 2 or 3 forms of ID. Never wear a hoodie, ever. The word for an African American in camouflage is incognito. Blackbirds are your birds. Red-winged blackbirds, grackles, rusty blackbirds, brewer's blackbirds, black scoters, the acclaimed black brant, crows, ravens, and blackbirds are largely maligned. Any bird that's Black is my bird. You know, the edge of day as light is fading, those crepuscular hours are the times when many birds come to life. It's such a beautiful time to bird. But if you're a Black birder and you're going to bird at night, you better be careful because you might be perceived as being up to no good. Be prepared to be confused with the other Black birder. When I meet another Black birder, it's like encountering an ivory-billed woodpecker, an endangered species. Extinction looms. These are the rules for the Black birder. We have to do something to make birding.
Back to the presentation. Okay. Thanks to Dr. Lanham and countless other modern pioneers in ornithology, diversity in ornithology and birding communities is finally changing for the better. If any of you have a Twitter or other form of social media, you may be familiar with Corinna Newsom, who created the account Black AF in STEM, and many hashtags relating to the first ever Black Birders Week in early June of 2020. Newsom and 30 other volunteers, including Dr. Lanham, started this wave of activism in response to the Central Park incident we discussed earlier, and the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests going on at the time, in order to, 1, counter the narrative that the outdoors are not the place Black people should be, 2, educate the birding and broader outdoor loving community about the challenges Black birders specifically face, and 3, to encourage increased diversity in birding and conservation. Black Birders Week and its resounding positive reception sparked numerous other activism opportunities in the months to come, all sharing the Black in blank hashtag theme. The National Audubon Society recently, in July of 2020, started a series of news articles and posts in order to, quote, re-examine the life and legacy of the organization's namesake. Oh, there we go. Forgot that was a slide. Okay. Another recent push in the ornithological community is the Bird Names for Bird movement, which aims to see that honorific and eponymous names for birds are changed. Eponyms, a person after whom a discovery, invention, or place is named or thought to be named, and honorific common bird names, a name given to something in honor of a person, are problematic because they perpetuate colonialism and the racism associated with it. These names are basically verbal statues representing social injustice that are perpetuated by speaking them. We sure covered a lot in that spiel, from ornithology as a profession to one of my personal heroes, Dr. Drew Lanham, Audubon, and the history of inequality beneath ornithology and birding, and how we are so fortunate to be alive to witness a radical shift in the way these practices influence everyone in our society. I would like to end with a few pieces of advice from Dr. Lanham on how to help further the movement. He said to get educated, get out there, and get our voices heard. So we will be posting links to helpful resources relating to our table topics on the Slater Museum website. So please look and read them if you're interested, and share with your friends and community. All right. Any questions, comments?
Thank you so much, Olivia. Really appreciate that thorough exploration. What a fascinating topic. Elizabeth, I see your hand is up. Did you have a question for Olivia?
Are you muted?
Yeah, Elizabeth, if you want to unmute and ask your question, if you're still with us.
Can't hear you yet. Oh, okay.
Oh, I think we see cat ears though.
Oh,
hi, I was just going to ask about if you are aware of Washington Trails, because they are very interested in getting groups out that are diverse groups, and the birding might be a real connection there. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, that's a great piece of information for me to know. I was aware of the Tahoma Audubon Society doing specifically walks for people of color and stuff like that, but I had not heard of the Washington Trails Association, so thank you. All right.
Is there going to be a Blackbirders Week this May? And if so, how would you participate in that? Or how would this museum?
Yeah, I am not sure if they're planning on doing another virtual presentation. On that slide, I put their kind of, back to it. They had 5 different events, one for every week. And it was sort of like, oh no. Let me try this again. There we go. It's very small actually, but every day of the week they had a different hashtag that you could use to communicate with people in the Black community in science, posting photos of birds and just kind of uniting the community as a whole. If they are doing a similar thing, I know I personally will be involved again. I don't know if I can speak for the whole museum though at this time, but good question.
I also just put a link in the chat to Delaware Online story about some events that are going on online for a virtual Blackbirders Week this year from May 30th to June 5th.
Yeah, and Peter Wimberger was also saying they had virtual panels every day of the week. I actually watched a couple of those. They were like Zoom panels with lots of very important figures in them, including Dr. Lanham. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Olivia. Really, really appreciate that. And as our resident bird walk leader, I really appreciate you really taking these issues and keeping those at the forefront as we think about issues of equity and access.
Oh,
So thanks
yes.
so much.
Yeah, forgot to plug the bird walks, but yeah.
Welcome back to, all right, everyone, welcome back to our final presentation of the evening, where Rahul and Kothari and I will be talking a little bit about community-based conservation. All right, Rahul, do you want to go ahead and pull up that presentation?
Yep.
All right, so Rahul and I are going to talk a little bit about community-based conservation, which is a really important topic that that I think is really relevant today. So what is community-based conservation? Community-based conservation at its core is our efforts that protect biodiversity that take into account local communities and participation as much as possible. So this differs from kind of a top-down model where an exterior organization or governmental body might be dictating what a community needs to do. Community-based conservation really starts as a grassroots movement and integrates the participation of local communities as much as possible. So in this photo here, we have some children at Lewa Conservancy in Kenya, which is a really, really fantastic organization that I think is a fantastic example of community-based conservancy. And we have a short video talking about some of the work that they do.
Lewa is a wildlife sanctuary, but it also supports schools, health clinics, female microcredit programs, and so much more. Lewa is a catalyst for wildlife conservation with a unique people-based model. This setup enables the communities around our conservancy to be empowered with the most sustainable path to the conservation of wildlife. Lewa invests in education for both children and adults. Through our many programs, we help expand job opportunities and provide a platform for conservation education. The essential needs of communities are met with Lewa's health clinics. We provide easier access to vaccinations, family planning, immunizations, and more. These clinics are often the only source of healthcare for thousands of Kenyans. We empower women through Lewa's microcredit program. Women can launch their own businesses, from general stores and farms to poultry rearing. This enhances livelihoods and increases living standards. We improve clean water access and assist farmers in sustainable irrigation so people and wildlife can share the limited water resources in this naturally dry area of Kenya. All of these programs, plus many others, aid in bringing positive changes to local communities, which help to sustain our wildlife conservation efforts. This model means Lewa is a successful safe haven for a variety of wildlife. Our success with community-based conservation has influenced other conservancies across northern Kenya. We envision a future where people all over the world value, protect, and benefit from wildlife, helping us to secure a future for Africa's most iconic species.
Would you like to switch back to that presentation? Excellent. So as you can see from that video, community-based conservation efforts really focus on uplifting the community so that the community can care for their own land. So if we compare and contrast community-based conservation with classical conservation, it involves local stakeholders and communities from the very beginning, as opposed to exerting control through governments and outside organizations. It addresses the needs and traditions of local communities, which you really saw in that video on Lewa, where they were providing microeconomic loans for small businesses, providing conservation education and healthcare for the local communities, so that a thriving community can care for a thriving ecology. And whereas top-down conservation tends to prefer to favor ideas about pristine wilderness and wilderness without any human intervention, rather than looking at humans as part of the ecological system. Kind of thinking back to earlier tonight with what Beatrice was talking about with the idea of systems and complementality instead of competition, thinking of humans less as separate from nature and more integrated into nature by incorporating traditional knowledge as part of the conservation strategy. And instead of favoring Western thought that separates nature from culture, is a real difference between community-based conservation and classical conservation. So how do we know whether or not a organization is doing community-based conservation? So here's a short checklist that you can do to see, ask yourself if the organization you're thinking about volunteering with or donating money to is community-based. Look at the project's goals. Are they decided in conversation with locals from the start, or were they pre-decided to be dictated to the local community? Is it a local organization that is spearheading the effort, or community group that is leading or co-leading that effort? Having local community groups placed on equal footing with larger national and international groups is a good sign that they're focusing on local community. Is there an understanding that the project may take 5 years or more? Community-based conservation projects, because they're about long-term sustainability, tend to be longer-term projects rather than shorter-term. Is the initial scope of the project small, such as a specific town or habitat? You always look for that locality, for really focusing on a zeroed-in specific goals that you can achieve in a small community is the key to community-based conservation. And our community members involved in wildlife monitoring, appropriate tourism, educating children, basically anything that the long-term goals of that conservation project, is the local community involved at every level. That's really, really important for community-based conservation, because if you are relying entirely on outside sources, that conservation will go away the moment that outside source leaves. Setting up the community to sustain these kind of conservation efforts is really, really vital. So to talk about some other examples of some community-based organization elsewhere in Africa, I'm going to turn this over to Rahul.
Okay. So community-based wildlife management areas can support similar species to national parks. So community-based conservation models have been widely implemented across the African continent to improve wildlife conservation and livelihoods of rural communities. Especially in Tanzania, communities can set aside land and formally register it as a wildlife management area. This basically allows them to use consumptive and non-consumptive use of wildlife in order to generate revenue. So consumptive use is more talking about when like people go like hunting, like safari hunts, or like if they're just fishing or trapping animals for like daily consumption. Whereas non-consumptive uses are generally considered to be those in which any wildlife is watched, studied, recorded without being killed. And they can be things like hiking, going on like just a safari, or even sketching or photography. And yeah, and now here's a picture of a vervet monkey, which can be found in the area where this study has taken place. Okay. And what scientists say, what I guess scientists or activists say is the best method for community-based conservation is adaptive management. Adaptive management is a structured initiative process of robust decision-making in the face of uncertainty, with an aim to reduce uncertainty over time via system monitoring. And system monitoring is is basically a way for to get locals involved in monitoring the local populations in the area that they're trying to conserve. And now I will show you some videos about conservation. And these videos were done by the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust in Madagascar.
We are trying to work with community in order to save species and their habitats, because many habitats and ecosystems in which species, our endangered species are living, are now under threats and pressures. So my work is then to help communities to protect, to save those habitats and ecosystems in order to save the endangered species. The main issues is that for Malagasy communities, poverty is very important and at its high rate. So many rural people rely on those natural resources for their livelihoods and subsistence. And that makes the pressures and threats very important for Madagascar. So in order to face this situation, we have then to develop program to help people, community people, to improve their living conditions and livelihoods, so that so to reduce the threats on natural resources and ecosystems. It is still a very great challenge, because Madagascar's situation gets worse year by year because of political crisis, the slow improvement of social and economic situation. But now we are working mainly within the five main conservation sites with more than 10,000 households that we could support until now. And we feel that with those communities, they know they are now more conscious about the importance of protecting habitats, ecosystem, biodiversity, because now we can already feel, they can feel this impact and adverse impact of the degradation of environment on their everyday life. So we feel now that there is a behavior change against this destruction of environment. Since my childhood, I was always inspired in protecting this main capital of my country, but at the same time, I know that natural resources and people cannot be separated. We have to live together, people and wildlife, and that's why I'm motivated to conservation. Yeah.
Okay. Now on to the next video about, also in Madagascar, and it's about community patrols.
These are the sights and sounds of Madagascar. Madagascar, the oldest island on the planet. Isolation has allowed fascinating plants and animals to evolve here that are found nowhere else on Earth. But Madagascar is under threat, with devastating effects for animals and people. Species are being pushed to the brink of extinction, and communities are relying on an ecosystem which cannot cope. People are often painted as the problem, and in many ways they are, but they also provide the solution. We need to work together. If we don't act now, this unique island and its species will be lost forever. For 25 years, Durrell has focused on protecting the most threatened species in the most threatened habitats. Our approach is to empower the local population, enabling them to lead the protection of their own environment and species. We work with rural communities, running projects which show just how important protection is for everyone. Together, we have already identified 3 new wetland protected areas that will be managed by local communities. To make these new protected areas a reality, we have created a network of local patrol teams that monitor and enforce local regulations. This has shown great promise.
Tao anatin'ny fotoana 3 taona voalohan'ny asan'ny CFL zany dia hita ny fiovana tao anatin'ny zetra rovana. Fiovana hita tamin'izany dia maitso ny zetra. Ary ny biby arovana ao anatin'ny zetra zany dia hita fa nitombo.
These teams are the eyes, the ears, and the feet on the ground. They see the connections between people's actions and the impacts on their environment. This approach has given them a sense of pride in the protection and sustainable use of their habitats. As well as protecting endangered species, this project helps to protect their livelihoods for future generations. We know this approach can work, but this is a...
Now I will show you a specimen of a pangolin.
So Rahul is showing off a pangolin here, and a pangolin is one of the species that really require community-based conservation in order to protect, because they're so heavily poached and exported as pets or as novelties. Pangolins really require local communities to take charge of preserving and conserving these animals. If we don't involve communities and help uplift them and provide economic alternatives to exporting these animals, they're very in danger of becoming more and more endangered and eventually extinct. All right, Rahul, can you hear me, or do you have your headphones off?
Yep.
All right. So we'll open up the floor to questions, and I think we only have time for 1 or 2 questions as we are running a little bit over our scheduled time. But if anybody has a question, I'll open up the floor now. Elizabeth, I see your hand up. Did you have a question, or is this from earlier? All right, I will assume that is from earlier. And if nobody has any questions, I will go ahead and thank everyone. Thank you so much, Rahul, for speaking with me about community-based conservation. And thank you, everyone, who attended tonight. Thank you for coming out and listening. Thank you to all our docents for putting together such wonderful presentations. I know that I learned some things tonight. I hope everyone else did too. We are going to be posting links with resources to all these to both our website, and then we're also going to be writing up some of this information for Elements, which is the Puget Sound Science magazine. And so we will also be posting some information through Elements as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, docents, for presenting. Thank you, Peter, and Mateo, and Josh, for all of your help. And we will leave it there tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your evening and a great rest of your week. Signing off.